Good evening from Woodford County Library. I'm Emily Saderholm, and we are pleased to present this Kentucky Reads discussion of Hannah Coulter in coordination with the American Association of University Women. At this point, I'll introduce Gay Broadwater from the AAUW, who will provide opening remarks.
Hi, good evening, everyone. I'm honored to be here, and on behalf of the Bluegrass Central Branch of AAUW, I want to welcome you to tonight's program and express our appreciation to each of you for attending this Facebook Live event. This is our second year Woodford County Library and AAUW has hosted a Kentucky Reads event. We have learned if there is a will, there is a way, even in this pandemic world. It is an honor to have one of Kentucky's own share her perspectives about Hannah Coulter tonight. Erin Chandler is the author of Junebug versus Hurricane and a collection of essays, as well as an actress, playwright, and educator. She posts a weekly column in the Woodford Sun and has a second novel in the works. In our planning meeting last week, I found myself wanting to chat with her all afternoon, and I'm confident you will enjoy spending the evening with her. This program is part of the Kentucky Humanities Statewide Literacy Initiative, Kentucky Reads. It was funded in part by the Kentucky Humanities and the National Endowment for the Humanities. Now, we are going to have an opportunity for you to submit questions in the Facebook Live chat room. We'll monitor those and get those to Erin through the evening. And also there will be a feedback opportunity at the end for you to give us your thoughts on this program through a SurveyMonkey link. So be sure to watch for it. We welcome your responses and your comments as those help us plan future events. So please wait for it. And now I'm pleased to turn the program over to Erin Chandler. It's you, Erin.
Hi, thank you, Gay. Thank you, Emily. It's so nice to be here. Happy October 22nd, everyone. I'm really happy to talk about this beautiful Wendell Berry book, Hannah Coulter. It is a really, really beautiful book about family and about rural communities and farms and growing up on a farm and coming home and leaving home and the change from the war. I'm going to be jumping around and reading some of my favorite passages, and then you all can pose questions as we go about it, and we'll just see where the discussion takes us. It's kind of strange not being able to see anybody but myself. Hi. No, I'm getting used to this Zoom world, but I'm going to start with them talking, Wendell Berry talking through Hannah, who is an older woman looking back on her life. And she reads, she speaks throughout and goes through her two marriages. Her first husband died in the war, up through the end of her life when she has the grandchildren around, and some have left, and the whole world has completely changed from where she grew up in Shady Grove, I believe it is, and Port Williams. I could tell, and this is a bit, this is about when the boys were going to war. And a lot of this book is about the tragedy of the families feeling when it was just an everyday thing to find out who's gone and who will never come back. I could tell of my sorrow when Virgil went away, but it was not strictly speaking my sorrow. It was the sorrow of the family, of Port William, of the whole country. A great sorrow and a great fear had come into all the world, and the world was changing. I grew up, it seems to me, in the small old local world of places like Shagbark and Hargrave and Port Williams, in their daily work and dreaming of themselves. I married Virgil in that world, which was his world too, though he had been to college. It was the world of our vision of a new house between the old chimneys. It was the world of the Feltners' Christmas dinner in 1941. But then, against the fires and smokes of the war, the new war of the whole world, that old world looked small and lost. We were in the world made by the new war. into which Virgil and our possible life together had gone away, for a time, as I hoped, but in fact forever. Our minds were driven out of the old boundaries into the thought of absolute loss, absolute emptiness in a world that seemed larger even than the sky that held it. And Wendell Berry is such a beautiful writer. He's someone so many people have studied, and this actually is the first book I've ever read by Wendell Berry, if you can believe it. I've read poetry and essays, but this is the first novel, and I'm just in love with it. I think that it's just a beautiful, beautiful telling, and really made me see the war in a different way. And he goes on in a couple pages later of that same subject to say, on Sunday morning and Sunday night, and on prayer meeting night, which was Wednesday, we would go to church and receive, it might be, a true blessing of consolation from some passage of scripture, from one of the good old hymns, or from being together. And we would hear also a sermon in which poor brother Preston would struggle with his terrible duty and need to bring comfort to the comfortless, to say something in public that could answer the private fear and grief that were all around him. And he would mostly fail. We would shake his hand at the door as we went out, trying, I suppose, to console him for his wish to help what only could be endured. And then lastly, he has a great passage about this, about the same, the small town around 1942. I need to tell about my people and their grief. I don't think grief is something they get over or get away from. In a little community like this, it is around us and in us all the time, and we know it. We know that every night, war or no war, there are people lying awake grieving. And every morning, there are people waking up to absences that will never be filled. But we shut our mouths and go ahead. How we are is fine. There are always a few who will recite their complaints, but the proper answer to how are you is fine. The thing that you most dreaded has happened at last. The worst thing you might have experienced has happened, and you didn't expect it. You've grown old and ill, and most of those you have loved are dead and gone. Even so, how are you? Fine. How are you? Fine. I just thought that was so telling. And so what I know a lot of people are experiencing today. And even though we've grown so much and things have gotten so much bigger, and even the little towns seem like big towns, it's hard to imagine what it would be like in a town of 30 people, basically that you see the same people in town, and they have lost their sons and daughters and brothers and sisters and uncles. So I believe that is a theme that goes in as Hannah loses her first husband to war. That's one of the most important themes in the book. And the other most important theme, I would believe, is community, is how he talks about Hannah's life in this little town, and how the Feltner place, her first husband, she grows up in this little tiny town at the beginning of the book, and her grandmother sends her out. She just has a very simple life. There's no running water, there's no anything, and but she's always working and helping out, and it's just in her nature. And then when she becomes 18 and she's a valedictorian, her grandmother's very excited that she's valedictorian, she goes to the little town next door, which is probably about as big as Versailles, which is where I'm from, and smaller than Versailles probably at the time. But she goes, her grandmother takes her to town and helps her get a job, and she gets a little rooming house, and she meets her husband there, and that starts up her town and starts up her life in this little town. And I think this is a good little excerpt to begin that section when we're talking about community in town and life. Like maybe any young woman of that time, I had thought of marriage, as promises to be kept until death, as having a house, living together, working together, sleeping together, raising a family. But Virgil's and my marriage was going to have to be more than that. It was going to have to be a part of a place already decided for it, and part of this a story begun long ago and going on. The Feltner place had been in that family for a long time, since the first white people settled there. Virgil had taken his place after his father, in line of those who were gone and those who were to come. It was something I needed to get into my mind. The love he bore to me was his own, but also it was a love that he had borne to him by people he knew, people I now knew, people he loved. That I think was what put tears in his eyes when he looked at me. He must have wondered if I would love those people too. Well, as it turned out, I did, and I would know them as he would. I would know them as he would never know them, for longer than he knew them. I knew them old, in their final years and days. I know them dead. And that's when you're reading that, towards the beginning of the book, it's on page 33. When you were reading that and you realize that Virgil's not going to last, that she's going to know his family longer than he knew his family, and better than he knew his family. And so that we're in for a long journey, and it certainly is a multi-generational journey. But she comes to this place. I love the idea that she's marrying into the place, and which is what the other theme of the book, I believe, from my perspective, is about community. And when I first read it, I'll have to be honest, I was like, is there really, when they were reading about Thanksgiving, I'm like, was there really such an ideal Thanksgiving ever in the planet? Or I don't think it was Christmas dinner, 1941. And we were reading it. I was reading it with my mom, and we were like, was this too ideal to be? Is this just too hallmarky and too sweet? And then when you get that contrasted, you think, no, this is actually what I think this family was like, what these farmers were like, and how ideal it was, and how it changed so much, but how it really set a standard that is possible today. That I watched a documentary about Wendell Berry the other night that was wonderful, called Look and See. And it was really wonderful. And he, I wrote down a quote that I wanted to share that he talked about. And he said, where is that? He said, the tragedy, now I've lost it, what I wanted to tell you all. Oh, I know where it is. And after seeing Wendell Berry's life and his family and the farm, and it'll make you just love Kentucky so much. It's just, it's a very kind of melancholy thing, because it's all the farmland, and it's so quiet, and it's so different than our world is and how we feel, but we forget that we live in this really amazing place. But Wendell Berry says the great cultural failure that we've made here in the United States is to mistake millions of individual small places with their own character, with their own needs and demands in use. We've mistaken them for nowhere. And that just hit me, because that's what we think of it. We think of it as passing through to get somewhere else. And that's what happens a lot in this book, is that the people are, my dog is going to drive me stark raving mad. The people in Hannah's life until her kids grow up, and the farming, what really takes a turn for the worst, actually, ultimately, I think, is when the tractors come, and the farmers, everything has to grow, and then it becomes a world of money making, and it replaces the people, and ultimately makes these places insignificant and hard to run. And the documentary was like, watching that documentary and reading Hannah Coulter at the same time was really quite an experience, because it was telling the same thing. And to see these farmers, here's something to that same thought. But the cities are overflowing and stepping toward us too. Mr. Feltner used to say in his last years, "You see those old hillsides of mine? Someday they'll be covered up with little huts. Maybe so, or maybe all our work and care will be bulldozed away to make room for something fancier. For Port William Estates, or Sand Ripple Park, or Sandhurst, or the Meadows, most people now are looking for a better place, which means that a lot of them will end up in a worse one. I think this is what Nathan learned from his time in the Army and the war. He saw a lot of places and he came home. I think he gave up the idea that there's a better place somewhere else. There is no better place than this, not in this world. And it's by the place we've got and our love for it and our keeping of it that this world is joined to heaven." Now, I think that, I'm going to check on the time. I think that that strikes me so close to home because I was born in Versailles and I left when I was 8 years old. And my dad got a job out in Las Vegas. And he was always telling my brother and me about us coming home. I said, when we're going to go home, when we go home, and my whole life. And that my brother was saying, when we get home. And I fought that notion for so long, even though we would come back to my grandparents. And like in the book, my grandmother's room in Versailles was always the safest room on the planet. It was just nothing. If there could be a war going on outside, and I felt so safe and comfortable in that room. And like that, I felt like that was home, but I felt like there was someplace better. And I experienced a lot and was gone, lived in Los Angeles for 25 years. And when I got home, I realized exactly what they say in the book, which is another big thing that I love so much about this book. They talk about the membership. When you're in a small community, you're a member there. And I don't know if I can find one of the quotes when they talk about.
Hey, Erin.
Yes.
Erin, there's a question or a comment that they would like for you to read the page number when you're quoting from the book.
Oh, absolutely. Okay, good. Yeah, sorry about that. I will do that now. When she talks about the membership of as Caleb's were lovers was made, the children grow up. Let's see. We're talking about her growing up with the kids. Well, that's a different thought. But she talks about the membership being part of this community. I felt, oh, here it is. This is our membership. This is page 93. This was our membership. Burley called it that. He loved to call it that. Andy Catlett, remembering Burley, still calls it that, and I do. This membership had an economic purpose and it had an economic result, but the purpose and the result were a lot more than economic. Joe Banyan grew a crop on Mr. Feltner, but also drew a daily wage. The Catlett boys too were working for wages since they had no crop. The others of us received no pay. The work was freely given in exchange for work, freely given. There was no bookkeeping, no accounting, no settling up. What you owed was considered paid when you had done what needed doing. Every account was paid in full by the understanding that when we were needed, we would go. And when we had need, the others or enough of them would come. In the long, anxious work of the tobacco harvest, none of us considered that we were finished until everybody was finished. In his old age, Burley liked to count up the number of farms he had worked on in his life and never took a cent of money. I love that. The membership includes the dead. Andy Catlett imagines it going back and back beyond that time when all the names are forgotten. The members, I guess you could say, are born into it, and they stay in it by choosing to stay, and they die in it, or they leave it, as my children have done. So this, I have to say that when I heard this, about this, and I think about Kentucky, and when I came back in my 40s after being gone, basically my whole life for good, except for coming back for a couple of years in college, it was everybody that I knew when I was little, everybody that I knew in college, everybody, the corner drug. I thought of Robin at the corner drug in Versailles. It's like being welcomed in open arms because they know you and they know your family and they know. I think that it was such a blessing that I didn't recognize until like Virgil at the end when he comes back, weeping and beat up by the world. His, grandmother, Hannah brings her grandson in, and it says, I picked him. Oh, that's something else. But anyway, it just, I still feel that every time I drive by the church that we went to when we were little, I feel like a member of the community in Versailles. And I think that all that has to do with growing up from, until I was 8 years old, and everybody just being surrounded you with love and support. And I think that one of the questions that was posed by the Kentucky Humanities was, what can we do? I'll say it exactly. Gay asked this community, what do you think rural communities are often neglected or disparaged in our news cycles, policy discussions and popular cultures? In what ways do you think Hannah Coulter helps us advocate a positive image in rural America? And I think that it's exactly what I experienced as a child, what Hannah experienced in her community, what is possible. Her kids do. I think that it helps us realize that that coming home is a place of support. And I think that the tragedy that we faced in a lot of our, when she says, what do you think are most important issues facing our communities in Kentucky, and how do discussions like tonight's help us rethink about our communities and shape our future? I think that some of the things I see a lot of distance in Versailles. I see a lot of people fighting each other. I wrote a column about this in the Woodford Sun, and about a dark secret. And I said that there's a dark secret in this idealistic community, that there is robberies going on. And we were having a garage sale and these Nazis showed up literally, and with their tattoos and their things. It's here underneath us. And I think that we need to speak out about it and call it out. And, I was driving down the street and some, people just zooming around and with this Confederate flag. I think that we have to, in order to get rid of this behavior and make it a safe place and make it inclusive for everyone, which I think that what we feel when we feel like we have a home, which some people go away to cities because they don't feel welcome in their own communities. And the families that I made when I lived in the big city are my best friends still today. So I love the city, but then I equally love that I experienced that and came home. And I think that there's just as much value staying and making your way out in the world, or coming home and enhancing and bringing your knowledge and experience home. And I think that I had 3 things here, what I think that we should work on, and that's inclusion, age, race, sex, sexual preference, education. There's no doubt in my mind Hannah would have accepted Virgie no matter what he'd experienced. In fact, she said so at the end. She said, I don't know what broke him down so much, but whatever it was her grandson, and he got to working on the farm. And that acceptance, B's acceptance. I think that if we foster that, hate, you can't, it's a tendency to hate the hate, which just brings about more hate. And I get so angry when I see people like this. I want to hate the hate, and I think that if we send love and appreciation for the people and show as an example how to accept everyone, then we can build communities and have our kids want to come home, and want to come home. There was another documentary, Silas, my dear, wonderful friend Silas House, was in that, about, what was that called? It was about Appalachia. But they were talking about how people born in, I believe it was in Hazard, that they were, encouraging everybody to get out and go away. What's wrong with you to stay? And then how are we supposed to build up these communities if everyone's encouraged to leave? How are we supposed to make it better and make it more civilized and sophisticated? And, and sophistication doesn't have to mean education. Wendell Berry's wife spoke in another documentary about how she learned that these people that were running the farm were smart just because they didn't go to school or college. They were using their minds and their bodies and their hearts, and they were just as sophisticated and educated in their own way. So it doesn't mean, there's room for all of it. There's room for all of it, but there isn't room for hate. There isn't room for this other business, and I think that, somebody didn't like it. The mayor of Versailles didn't like it. He brought my column down and, this is not good. But it's the most amazing place in the world. It's like, no, let's make it better. There is room to make it better. And there is room. There is, people on Pisgah Pike, they're robbing, the mailboxes. And, that's just, doesn't have to be a sign of the times. Maybe we say it's a sign of the times, but it doesn't have to be. I think that we can make our rural communities better. I think that to get off my soapbox and back onto Hannah Coulter, I think that the farmers, I'm so glad that we planted carrots in our backyard and vegetables and that's just in a little plot of land. I think that we can learn, even though a lot of the big tractors and a lot of the big industry has made a lot of farms obsolete in some ways, and it can't be that homespun kind of feeling. We can still grow and learn. Hannah said something really amazing. Let me find this passage about the family. Just when I was saying, one thing she says on page 121 is, with every year that passed, it was getting less likely that a farmer's child was going to grow up to be a farmer. When our boys were still babies, a great man in Washington was telling the farmers, get big or get out. The good farm economy that had held up through the war and for a while after began to weaken. So, and she says, you send your on the page before 119, she says, you send your children to college, you do the best you can for them. And then because you have to be, you're careful not to make plans for them. You don't want to be disappointed. You don't want to burden them with your expectations either, but you keep a little thought, a little hope that maybe they'll go away and study and learn and then come back, and you'll have them for neighbors. You'll have the comfort of being with them and having them for companions. You'll have your grandchildren nearby when you can get to know them and help to raise them. But that doesn't happen often anymore. And you know better than to hope too much, or you ought to. Oh, that was very, very sad because if somebody's, I always feel like I would have done well living in a circus, because I like when everybody's all for one for all, a traveling circus. Pop up my French tent. I'm trying to find the note that she said about betting on this one family. I just loved this. She says, tractors and farmers, the last call to, that was our membership. Hold on one moment. She says, well, I'm gonna, I don't know what it is exactly, but she's talking about this, oh, okay. I will not, I don't think I can find that. You never forget. Well, is there, let's see, you think you can everything. Okay, let's Let's open it up to some questions. And then I'm going to get back to these other passages in between while we're reading. I've gone 30 minutes now, and I want to find the passage that I'm looking for, which when she's talking about these, this family, and none of them went to college, and none of them went off to do anything. And they came back and they worked, and they just had just enough. And then she said, if I was a betting woman, or if I had wages, I would bet on that family. And I love that, and because they're going to be here, they don't have to let somebody else tell them that they can do their job. She talks about one of her sons, and says, one day their jobs are going to be obsolete, when they get older. But if you manage to do something that you can do forever, and then you have, like the American Indians culture, like that they respect, the elders, and they hold them up as wise people, then you can create and foster a culture that respects those values. And there's always room for everything. So, Emily.
We don't have any questions from viewers, but I think Gay has some questions that she can offer you.
Okay.
And I'll just unmute myself. Can you hear me okay, Erin?
Yes.
Okay, well, the other question that I pondered was, what aspects of gender and racial roles from the book do you continue to see today in today's world, and what kind of guidance maybe does the book give us in terms of addressing some of these challenges in today's environment?
Yes, it was very interesting, like that idealistic 1941 Christmas. That was just, the pies are here and the this and that. And it was just so perfect. And then at the end, the women go off to the kitchen, and the men go into the den, and the little boys go out to play, and the little girls take a nap in the sweetest little room. And so it is, that was definitely, that was definitely different. And the women are seen to, and then she even says the women are going to clean up the commotion of the house. Do you remember that? Okay. Do you remember that?
I was muted. Yes, I do. Yeah.
Yes. And so anyway, so yeah, I think that it's, with how confusing everything is now, it's, I don't want to sound like I'm not in for all women's lib, because I am, obviously. But it was sort of comforting, it seemed sort of comforting, that thought. But gender, I don't understand your question, really. Are you saying that what aspects of gender and racial roles?
Well, there were things about, like one of the questions that prompted me to have that question was about chapter 8, about attraction and female beauty. That chapter 8 centered on that.
Yeah, it was a little sexist. Like, did you feel it was sexist a little bit?
Well, a little bit, and it also maybe didn't allow her to express, just at the times women couldn't express their sexual desires or feelings, and
Right.
and how delicately he wrote about that, I guess.
Yes, it was. I don't know much personally about Wendell Berry, except for what I've seen and on documentaries and everything. And I feel like his wife certainly seemed like, she seemed amazing. She seemed like she would have, I don't know what I'm trying to say here. I think that the book sort of simplified everything. I think the view of Hannah was she was never uncomplicated. As my mom commented, she said she never did anything wrong. She never did anything untoward. Neither did her daughter. Neither did Margaret. Margaret's husband left her. Her daughter's husband left her. But the women, there weren't any villains except for the war in this book. I think that it was a statement on these things that he wanted to make a statement on, like the farm life, like the easy rural life. I don't think that, that there weren't any, whatever happened, in the big cities or in the other things, it didn't seem to come. What did you think?
Well, I think maybe part of it is that it was a male writing what he thought women were thinking, and
Yes,
trying really hard to acknowledge it, but also still had to write from his own experience. Because I know I told you last week when we talked, so much of Hannah's early years reminded me of things I knew about my own mom, who grew up on a farm and grew up in a rural area, led a very sheltered, isolated life, and wasn't probably prepared for some of the next things that were coming after the war and relationships.
right, right. Right. It was not, Wendell Berry is not Charles Bukowski.
Yeah.
And he is writing, of women, the women that he knew and loved. And like I said, when I look at his life and how sort of idealistic and wholesome it seems, I feel like, if there was such a Hannah Coulter that was able to live such a sheltered, comfortable life, sheltered in that way, not in, I mean, everybody was pretty, her grandmother, there were boys that were tried things on her, and she was like, don't, are you ready to try that in front of grandmam, but
Right.
but I think that, yes, it was a man's version of sort of an ideal woman. I mean, I think that Hannah would be somebody that I don't think anybody could find any fault in Hannah. I think that even her children and grandchildren, um, besides wanting to keep them safe and have them close to home, I don't see anything that it was, I don't know. Do you think she was multi-layered?
I do think there was probably more complexity there, and it would be interesting to find some way to go back and revisit her, maybe in a dual theme of some kind. And we
Mhm.
do have a comment that from one of the viewers that says the story was written unbelievably realistically. And I think for that time and place and context, it is.
Right,
It is.
right.
We live in such a multifaceted world now, so sometimes it's hard for us, like you said earlier, it's hard for us to believe that really was a real existence for many people at one time.
Exactly. I think it is sometimes hard for us to believe, but then it's also, he's does not shy away from, there was just something that just broke my heart, that I'm seeming to lose my oh gosh. I said, this was a stark contrast from the very beginning. He talked about the power of some people to say whether other people would live or die. He didn't like the idea of killing women and old men and children, or destroying the world in order to kill people, or of great machines made only to kill people. And this was a stark contrast. Almost seemed like it was from a different book or a different author. What was so tragic about the war? It's literally like being dipped in hell, no matter what or where you come from. He says, holding in your arms, talking about somebody before they went to war, holding in your arms a good, decent, gentle, beloved young man with the blood keen in his veins, who before long is going to disappear, just disappear into a storm of hate and flying metal and fire, and you don't know it. And I just, it's the horror of that. And so that's something that they understood, but it did seem like such a stark contrast and such a different world, to have that. And it would be thrown in the book. There's just this family, and the family went through a lot. I would say that, Hannah's life was giant, and it couldn't have been more full, from beginning to end. If she, won a Pulitzer Prize and went and traveled Europe, it was so filled with so many personalities and people and different kinds of family members and different kinds of children and their different careers and lives and tragedies and the war and the two husbands. And she had a giant life and she didn't leave this one area. So, you know, there's that.
Mhm.
What else did you all think about Hannah Coulter that struck you? I loved Burley. I loved Burley, the uncle, and he was. I'll read it past this setup. We have time. Wait, how are we running on time, Emily?
We're at 7:11, so you've got about 20 more minutes.
Okay. All right. Well, Burley was just one of my favorite characters. And I loved his kids, Lydia and Danny Branch. But when she's talking about Burley, she said, when he was young, Burley was as wild as you please. He caused a lot of trouble for himself and for other people. He had the gift of construing the trouble into a joke. The joke was almost always on himself and was a good joke. And so the people who cared about him and were troubled by him almost always forgave him. And so he managed to be wild without being more than temporarily disowned by the family or the neighbors. To use his word, he continued to be a member because they wanted him to be. To use another of his words, he was a wayward member. Later, he was a member because he wanted to be. So it's like, and he was, there's always that character that is so charming. And so, but they're usually the ones in the end that you can count on. The troublemakers are always the good ones. Sometimes. There was another thing I wanted to show it. When their son didn't want to go on the farm, I think we've kind of discussed that. I'm going to go to the. Oh, here's what I was going to share earlier about the branches, when she was saying that she bet on people that could take care of themselves. And compared to nearly everybody else, the branches have led a sort of futureless life. They planned and provided as much as they needed to, but they take little thought for the morrow. They aren't going anyplace, and they aren't getting ready to become anything but what they are. And so their lives are not fretful and hankering, and they're all still here, still farming. They are here. And if the world lasts, they're going to be here for quite a while. If I had venture capital to invest, I think I would invest in the branches. And I love that because people find out, when you leave, when you're, ambition is good. I'm still ridiculously ambitious and want, I'm about to do a documentary and I'm like, so what? I'm always already expecting it to be at the Academy Awards or wanting it to be at the Academy Awards. And so, that's all kind of gravy because what I've finally found at this age, I finally am comfortable where I am and comfortable just living. And I was, looking through this book again, and I was so warmed by the thought of she's just living for the sake of living. And if sometimes we never stop, some people never stop to just be and, have lunch and talk to the neighbors and have dinner. Especially in the world that I just came from in LA, it's just go. What are you going to do this? You're going to do this and you're going to do this. And you may miss your entire life going. And I don't think that's where it's at.
Well,
Go ahead.
Oh yeah, I just had a question related to what you were just talking about, Erin.
Mm-hmm.
There was a question I saw. It says the idea of place features prominently in this novel. How does Hannah understand and describe this concept, but more particularly, can such a place be found apart from the land, or can a significant place be found outside an agrarian community? You mentioned, living, your experience living in Los Angeles and coming
Yes.
from Kentucky. How would you say, compare those two?
You know, I thought about this when I was reading it because I was thinking about, you always hear about, I've never lived in New York, but you always hear about the boroughs in Brooklyn, back in the day. I think that you can be in a city and create the same kind of community, probably easier in New York where there's neighborhoods and you're walking and everybody's driving in LA. But I think that if people are open and, you know, and they'll talk to their neighbors and they'll be open and I think that you can create it. I created it because I was an actress and a lot of my friends I met in acting class when we were in our early 20s and we're still best friends to this day. And we sort of took care of each other my whole 20s and 30s. We all, there are a lot of families, people that, and they're still out there and you make your family where you are and with friends, but you have to have those friends to count on, and I was very lucky to meet some good friends, but I think that a lot of times it's difficult, and it's even difficult in a tiny town if people are not open and welcoming to people that decide to move there and make their home a small, beautiful place like Woodford County. I would hope that we would always be open to everyone, or if somebody moved to the middle of New York City, if they inherited that's just a dream. No, if they inherited a little apartment in New York, and they should be able to be welcome to be a member of that community. I think that is, that's all we have is each other, and if you can't count on somebody when they say the work is not done until everybody's work's done, I think that that's what we should, if nothing else, show by example, to each other and not accept anything less than that.
I was going to ask about how you take these kinds of ideas and use them in the writing classes that you teach in terms of helping people record these valuable stories. Because I feel like, as I was just sitting here right now, realizing we're documenting our lives on social media and we're not doing it in other ways that might be more better received in the long run.
Right. That's the way that this pandemic has sort of been a blessing in a strange way about us connecting, because I think that I'm able to teach many more classes. I teach a memoir class and for the Carnegie Center and also privately, but I love, and I have a small publishing company called Rabbit House Press. And I publish memoirs and people's poetry collections. And it's so exciting because I think it's so important. And one of our themes, Brooke Lee and I run Rabbit House Press. And what I love about it is that it's so important for us to show all the different ways that people live in America, and how different and diverse it is and how many stories, this are happening right here. And I think that that's what's so beautiful about reading, which is why I've just love books and reading and writing, is because you can enter another world and there's so many things. You don't even have to leave your same street, and there's a million different stories on that street. And I think that what I encourage people to do in my classes is to have a lot of people struggle with feeling like it's some kind of ego trip to tell your story. It's your birthright to tell your story. It's your birthright to your experience on Earth. How you don't have to have climbed Mount Kilimanjaro to write a memoir. You are just what it's like to be human in your body with your experiences, with the people that have been around you. I think that telling stories is a way that brings us all together. It brings us together and lets us understand. And what's so ironic is that the range of human emotions is rather small or very small compared to all the different experiences we have. It all comes back to these 7 deadly sins and these, few emotions that we have, and people will relate to you.
what books would you recommend that we read aside from Hannah Coulter to explore these topics?
Well, I can recommend a couple of books from Rabbit House Press, if I do say so myself.
Sure.
Junebug versus Hurricane. This is a collection of my essays, Cinderella Sweeping Up. I just published this book by Pamela Day, a Lexington lawyer, After the Race. A beautiful memoir I recommend highly is Kevin Lane Derringer's Bad Sex in Kentucky. He talks about growing up gay and Catholic in Versailles in the 50s. So, you know, that's quite a story. But he moved to New York, but to find his own family. He didn't feel accepted, and he went to New York and became a Broadway actor and for 40 years, and then came home and was a professor. He's a brilliant, brilliant storyteller. And Kaylon Roberts, Stream. This is a wonderful book by Kaylon Roberts. That's Johnny Lackey's painting on the front, which is beautiful. My favorite author, you know, is one of my favorite authors is Joan Didion. She tells stories and essays that are just brilliant, and The White Album is one of my favorites. I also think that a book that I teach a lot is Mary Carr. Her The Liars Club is one of the best descriptions and things, you know, of life in Texas. I lived in Texas for years, and she does West Texas like nobody's business. And her memoir Lit is equally brilliant. I think that Mary Carr and Joan Didion, who else? Let's see. That I teach a lot. I teach Sam Shepard. I think his last book is brilliant. The Spy of the First Person. He wrote after he got his illness, and it is just I've always loved his writing and his plays and his memoirs, like Motel Chronicles and Spalding Gray is one of my favorites. But yeah, I definitely recommend, especially Kentuckians people, because he's talking about being there in Midway. I recommend people get Sam Shepard's book, A Spy of the First Person. It's really, really good. Those are some that I suggest.
Emily, do we have any more questions?
Unmute myself there. No, not yet. We did have that one comment that said, Pauline says she totally agrees about what you said about growing up in maybe a borough in New York. She grew up in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and it felt like a membership.
Yes, that's what I mean. I mean, I love that. And many books that I've read, people being, you know, in an apartment building or something, and, you know, you can just count on your neighbor wherever. It's like the membership of that. I do think it's absolutely, we can create it. It's really about, it's what about Hannah Coulter is so beautiful is people cared about each other. And I think that is the bottom line, is when people are actually cared about people from the beginning of their lives to the end of their lives. You know, they in cities, you know, get to know people, get to know, and in small towns. And I think we've got a lot of work to do in Kentucky. I think that that those of us who are, you know, of open minds need to work to not accept the hate that happens. You know, when I got on Voices of Versailles, it's just, there can be just these, I just had to erase that social media thing. And I'm not on Twitter. Like, I don't even know how I would handle all of that. Like, if you were really well known and everybody Twitter attacked you, I would just be like, I don't think I could handle that. But there's a lot of that floating around. And I think that there's something, Nancy Royden also is one of my authors. Her book, From Kentucky to Kathmandu, Transcendental Voyages from Kentucky to Kathmandu, is beautiful, about searching for a spiritual answer to a lot of these frustrations. And I work, I do a lot of like Kundalini and meditation, try to. And sometimes at the end, what they'll say is picture yourself with the light. Picture someone you love. Close your eyes and picture someone that you love so much, and send them all what where all of their dreams and happiness comes true and everything. You feel all this energy and light going towards them. Now move that to everyone in the world. And the other day, I was like, I told my mom, I'm like, I just moved it to Lindsey Graham. I was like, I'm sending love to Lindsey Graham. It's like, you have to, even the people that you think are horrific, you have to send them the same energy. And because it really is the bottom line. They're all just, you can't, you have to practice what you preach. And it's hard for me sometimes, but I really do try. And I believe that, everybody wants to be happy. Everybody wants to be fulfilled and to be seen and heard. And I think that we've got our work cut out for us, but I'm hoping that things get better. Maybe if there aren't any more questions, maybe, Emily, do you have anything else you think we need to cover for Hannah, or anything else?
Unmute myself again here.
Okay.
There's another topic. What is the role of faith in her life and in the community of Port William? Because there were so many biblical allusions that were subtly present.
Yes.
Is anything
Yes.
stand out to you?
I believe, and Gay, maybe you could help me out on this. I believe I didn't find it overly religious at all. I mean, I felt like Hannah was absolutely of the Christianity that I feel I am, which is just to love other people, and to take care of other people and accept other people. But I think that it just seemed like part of the community. I'm not an expert on the Bible.
Well, if you're asking me, I guess as I think about that question, I would have to say there was certainly a Christian presence in her life, but that she didn't have to tell you that she was Christian for you to know that.
Right.
And that it was just the way it was internalized, so you didn't have to consistently remind people, oh yes, I'm a Christian.
Right. There was none of that in anybody in the community. I didn't feel like there was
No,
it was
everybody was that way. Correct.
Right. Yeah. I loved it. And it was really about what Christ was like, helping other people and accepting other people. And I think that was the overtones. And then, when tragedies happen, I forgot whether it was Nathan or Virgil that would just say, we just get up and we move on. We just go whenever, something bad would happen to one of them. It's like, well, Hannah, we just get up and we move on and we just continue living. And it wasn't, I didn't mean to ever imply that it was really sugar-coated in so many ways, because it wasn't. There were so many hardships and so many things, and they were just strong. They were strong people. And it was like, that's what life was. And I think that that's what Hannah got to know at the end of her life, looking back, is that she didn't feel, poor me, I lost this person and that person and this went on. It was all about just moving through life and loving. She was sitting by the fire at the end, and looking back like it was a dream dreamed. I believe he said that looking back on my life was like a dream dreamed. And that's what I think a lot of our lives are going to feel like. And I think that she certainly did her best and didn't have a lot of regrets. She had a lot of sadness. There's a difference between having a lot of sadness and having regrets.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I grew up in one of those rural communities in central Indiana. We had no incorporated town in the 3 townships that made up our school district. And we just knew everybody. And when someone died, you took the covered dish, and
Yes.
kind of Minnesota, but we were the same way. I mean, everybody pitched in. If somebody was sick, you made the hay for them, And nowadays people tell you, oh, you're just, nobody's going to do that for you anymore, or you're being naive, or you're too nice, or something. And I think that we have to, like you said, get back to saying, no, this is the way we want it to be, and we're going to behave that way.
And I think that in Versailles, we do have a lot of that. I was saying that I've seen the darker side that I'd never seen before or wasn't privy to, but the good side that is still right there on the top, and which I'm living in and breathing and contributing to, is like with Robin at the Corner Drug. And Robin and Kelly came the other day and gave me a flu shot. They were just, we're just driving around giving flu shots, and I'm like, oh my God, I love this town.
Yeah,
I love
that's
Hannah
awesome.
at the bank. The sweet girl at the bank, I just adore, and Emily at the library, who I love, and everybody. There is just a wonderful community, and I couldn't be happier. And Mark too. Mark, my husband, went away to Washington D.C. for 25 years after college and moved back, and we couldn't be happier to be growing old in Versailles and living in this life, and we want to contribute and make it better. It's there's I was just about to say something about Kelly and Robin doing that. I don't remember, but there's just so many things. Oh, I was going to say that my friend from LA came to stay with me for a couple of weeks last year, and I was like driving around, and she just couldn't believe how sweet everybody was. And I was like, well, here we're at home, and then 2 seconds later we're at the bank, and 2 seconds later we're at the, it's like you can run all of your errands where, right. And I think that's really nice.
Yeah, you don't need ways to do it.
Right. Exactly. And I think I just the kind of town that they were living in, and you don't know what was going to happen to Port Williams. You don't know how that is. I think that it's a really, my cousin Bruce Lewis is writing a book that we're publishing at Rabbit House Press, and he grew up in Woodford County. He's a jazz musician and lived in Romania for Bulgaria. Not Bulgaria, that's correct. He lived in Budapest for 20, 30 years as a jazz musician, but he grew up on a farm in Woodford County. And in his book, back and forth from like the musician's life, it's all the way through. And I've been editing it, is about just like what Hannah Coulter is about, the farm life in Woodford County and how it completely changed when the tractors came in, and when it had to, when all of this, when the world just changed. And my Uncle Jock, his father, when, how he had to change everything. I felt like after reading that I know all about farm life in Woodford County, and they had a cattle farm and grew all this other stuff. But it's really interesting, and it's the same thing that Wendell Berry's talking about. And it's really sad when that was your life, and how you're sort of forced out of it by machines.
Yeah. We really didn't even get on the machine part, but
Yeah,
we got social media, so I guess in a way we did. So we just skipped generations there.
Yeah.
So there's one comment I want to make sure that was presented from Becky Van on the Facebook, and she said this was an inspiring and affirming presentation. And I think that someone who works hard like you at your craft and your art, and then spends this kind of time with us, we really appreciate it. And it showed that your preparation and your talent really shone tonight. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Gay. Thank you all for asking me to talk about it.
Well, and we appreciate the opportunity to be with, I'm going to start my video back up here. Is that okay?
Yeah, please.
Emily, we want to thank everyone for participating tonight. I'm not sure how many people actually logged in, but we'll find out soon. We also appreciate the support of the Kentucky Humanities statewide literacy initiative called Kentucky Reads. We know that that's such an important contribution to our communities throughout Kentucky. And this conversation has been going on throughout the state this past year, and then also with the support of the National Endowment for the Humanities. Bringing authors to our homes in this era really is an exciting thing. I would have never thought I could sit here and talk with Erin like I have tonight. So thank you, Erin, for that. So AAUW and the Woodford County Library will post the link to the recording of this program on our Facebook pages later, probably sometime tomorrow. They'll show up as a YouTube channel link. So at the end here, we're going to receive a feedback poll. I think it's in the form of a Survey Monkey. So otherwise, we are concluding for tonight, and we want to say stay well, stay safe, and thank you for your engagement.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody that listened. All right.
Good night.